right now in the last couple of minutes. The Supreme Court is agreeing to weigh whether former President Donald Trump can be kicked off the ballot in Colorado, as the Colorado Supreme Court has ruled. And as you know, that ruling from the Colorado Supreme Court was put on hold while this was appealed all the way to the U.S. Supreme Court. Danny Cevallos is joining us now to give us the breakdown. Danny, I understand that they're going to hear it on February 8th, which is the same day as the Nevada caucus.
Yes, exactly. And the issue here is that even though the Supreme Court may be taking up this Colorado case, they may decide a universal issue such as whether or not Donald Trump is an officer within the meaning of Section 3, which was a big issue in Colorado. But all these other states, it doesn't necessarily dispose of those other states unless and until, arguably, those states have a petition before the court. So this may end up being a piecemeal process if the only case the court is hearing is the one in Colorado.
Oh, okay. Now, Danny, I'm just reading through this on my laptop as we talk here. We've got the Maine challenge as well, which is the most immediate other challenge that's gone all the way to the Maine Secretary of State.
Exactly right. And look at this is a great example of how different these cases are, even though they seem so similar. In Colorado, the two major issues were, was Donald Trump an insurrectionist, and was he an officer within the meaning of Section 3 of the 14th Amendment? Similar issues in Maine. But in Maine, they went through the administrative process, through the Secretary of State. In Colorado, they went through the courts. What a huge difference. And actually, legally, they could have gone through the Secretary of State in Colorado. And now in Maine, it may go through the courts. But what if, for example, a court determines that this is what's called a non-justiciable question, something the courts can't hear at all? Then you have a situation where Colorado, that decision may be null and void. And meanwhile, the administratively decided one in Maine could be legitimate. The point is, this is becoming very quickly a patchwork quilt of different decisions on the issue of whether Donald Trump can remain on the ballot.
And importantly, the Colorado decision is based on the 14th Amendment. The Colorado Supreme Court ruled, in fact, ruled in contrary to what the appeals court in Colorado had already said. The Colorado Supreme Court said, sorry, the 14th Amendment does not allow somebody who engaged in an insurrection to actually be on the ballot for president. It seems to me one challenge, according to many legal scholars, is he's not been convicted of being involved in an insurrection.
That is the weakest argument, in my opinion, for the Trump team, because when you look at the language of the Constitution, which often suffers from being a little too general and a little too vague and written in old-fashioned language, but when you look at the language of the 14th Amendment, it doesn't anywhere require a conviction for insurrection. And I think most leading scholars would agree. I think there's almost universal agreement on this, except for maybe on the Trump side, that you don't need to be convicted of insurrection. That insurrection determination is kind of left open. So to be a conviction, but what it has to be, how it's determined, that part is a little unclear.
And I'm also noting here that now there's talk in Texas of a retaliatory move from the lieutenant governor of kicking Biden off of the ballot in Texas.
Yes, and that, of course, is always the risk with these kinds of political judicial maneuvers, is that what's good for the goose is good for the gander. And it should be no surprise that Republicans will start trying to do the same thing. But they're not going to have as easy a path, because there is the insurrection clause in the Section 3 of the 14th Amendment. You have a pretty good set of facts when you look at January 6th.
Real quickly, is this a quick turnaround in terms of what we expect from the Supreme Court? Do you expect a decision quickly? And are you surprised that they've come out and said they will take the case as quickly as they did?
I'm not surprised that they're taking it. It was a near certainty that they would take it, and not surprised that they did so quickly. We're often asked, legal analysts like me, how soon, what's the timeline? And for most of these cases, we have only our own cases of people involving people that no one's ever heard of. And so the timelines we're used to are weeks and months. But when it is such a critical constitutional issue like this, it really isn't a surprise that the Supreme Court would stop what they're doing and focus on a decision like this with such monumental, earth-shattering implications. It's no surprise they move at breakneck speed for these cases. But for your run-of-the-mill case involving some guy you've never heard of, don't expect this kind of treatment.
All right, Danny, thank you very much. Let's quickly go now to NBC's Vaughn Hilliard, who's on the campaign trail. He's in Iowa, where President Trump is campaigning this evening. And I guess, Vaughn, it's too early to have any sort of immediate reaction from the crowd behind you, but it's pretty clear what the Trump campaign has felt about the Colorado and the Maine decisions to take him off the ballot.
Exactly, Tom, and all this is running perpendicular to the political. The day of those oral arguments on February 8th is the day of the Nevada caucus. Of course, it's the Iowa caucus, the New Hampshire primary, and then the Nevada caucus. And this here, the timeline that the Supreme Court is working on allows them to make a ruling potentially early enough, if they were to affirm the Colorado Supreme Court's decision disqualifying him from a ballot, that would still leave the great share of the Republican electorate around the country to select a different candidate for president of the United States. Just 2 weeks after that is the South Carolina primary. Obviously, the stakes of this are high, and I'll let our legal team get into the specifics. But Donald Trump is landing, as we speak right now, into Iowa for 2 days of campaign rallies. We are in rural Sioux Center, Iowa. Of course, we're going to talk to the campaign team. You could very well expect Donald Trump to take this head on when he gets on stage. Donald Trump, to be clear, well, a great many legal experts expect the Supreme Court to leave him on the ballot. Donald Trump is concerned about this decision in front of the Supreme Court. His own attorney, Alina Habba, said just that 2 days ago, and suggesting his fear is based on the own Supreme Court justices that he nominated and that were appointed to the U.S. Supreme Court, 3 of them during his 4 years in office, Tom. And he fears that, in the words of Alina Habba, his attorney, that they could try to appear neutral by ruling against him. It was just 1 year ago, in fact, he put out on a social media post that the Supreme Court always rules against him. Of course, that's not always the case, but on that particular ruling in 2022, they forced him to turn over his tax returns to a congressional House committee that subpoenaed them. So for Donald Trump, there's a lot at stake. The future of his presidential campaign is at stake, and we are just about 10 days away from the Iowa caucus right now. And of course, voters say that they're going to stick with him no matter what, but it's hard to ignore the fact that the Supreme Court is going to be making the determination, more likely than not, whether he's going to be a presidential candidate in 2024, Tom.
You know, you made such a good point there, Vaughn, real quickly. Let you expand on it. He has grown his base with these challenges to his candidacy, with the Colorado decision, with the Maine decision. The question is whether what's happening in the middle, what's happening with independents in this country as this campaign progresses.
Right. That is the issue here. And honestly, when you look at the polling between Iowa and New Hampshire, Tom, you see Nikki Haley performing much better in the state of New Hampshire, because in New Hampshire, they allow independent voters to go and take part in the Republican primary process. Here in Iowa, you have to be a registered Republican, and Iowa polling shows him about a 30-point lead. And in New Hampshire, polling has Nikki Haley down anywhere from 4 points to 10 points. So it's a much smaller deficit, because we see that independent voters, they're looking for somebody not named Donald Trump. They're looking for somebody not named Joe Biden. But right now, if the Republican electorate has their say, he's winning in polling in every single state. And so, you know, that's where you've seen the RFK Jr. trying to get on the ballot as an independent candidate. This group, No Labels, is trying to create a potential bipartisan presidential ticket to try to cater more toward the middle of the country, people that are dissatisfied with both Donald Trump and Joe Biden.
Yeah. Vaughn, you've got an interesting and a long night ahead of you. Thank you very much. Let's get back to Danny real quickly. You know, Danny, I've listened to conservative commentators on this who come down on both sides of this issue. Some say that they expect the Supreme Court will reaffirm the Colorado decision, and others say the Colorado decision doesn't have a chance in heck of being supported. What is your takeaway?
I think the takeaway is to look at this as playing the odds. So no matter what side you're on, you look at all the different, I guess you can call them opportunities, but you can look at switches that have to be aligned for Donald Trump to be kicked off the ballot. And for example, take a look at the Colorado Original District Court, the trial court. It concluded that Donald Trump was an insurrectionist after an evidentiary hearing. But even though he was an insurrectionist, it also concluded that he was not an officer within the meaning of Section 3 of the 14th Amendment. Therefore, he wasn't covered. Therefore, he would remain on the ballot. Then it goes to the Colorado Supreme Court. They're sharply divided 4-3, so that was a close call. But so many things need to line up for Donald Trump to remain off the ballot. The failure of any one of them, and Donald Trump remains on the ballot. For example, we talked about whether or not the courts can even hear this issue, or whether it's really committed to another branch, to an administrative branch. Maybe Maine got it right by doing it administratively. So that's an issue as well. There may be several other reasons why a court, the Supreme Court in particular, can conclude that Donald Trump stays on. Everything needs to line up perfectly for those who want to kick him off the ballot, for him to remain off the ballot. So if you're just placing a bet, the odds are going to be in favor of Donald Trump staying on the ballot. If for no other reason, then almost everything, all these issues have to line up perfectly for him to remain off the ballot. Any one of them failing, he remains on the ballot.
Danny, great expertise. Thank you very much. And Von Hilliard, thank you very much.